Who the hell are you? Just some washed-up movie star? A burly man roared, kicking dirt that spattered against a tree. His name was Spike, the crew's leader. In front of him, Jason Statham was bound hard against a rough oak, a streak of blood matting his iconic shaved head. He kept his head bowed, his breathing even. Nearby, a lanky man called Razor toyed with a switchblade. "Look at him, boss. He's terrified." They laughed, thinking they'd catch him in a sheep. But they hadn't noticed the cold calculation in Statham's downcast eyes. Until, before I show you how he used a single bone in his wrist to flip the script in under 60 seconds. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The forest night was cold, biting at any exposed skin. The only warmth came from a sputtering campfire that cast long, dancing shadows, making the surrounding trees look like skeletal giants. The air was thick with the reek of cheap whiskey and the foul, meaty scent of unwashed bodies. This was the makeshift camp of the Red Hands, a gang of local thugs who'd bitten off far more than they could chew. Their leader, Spike, took a long pull from a bottle and spat into the dirt. He was a bull of a man, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and small, cruel eyes. "I can't believe it was this easy," he sneered, his voice a low rumble. The big man himself, Mr. Tough Guy. Beside him, Razor laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound like scraping metal. He was all sharp angles and twitchy energy, and his switchblade never stopped moving. Flick, open, close, flick. He ain't so tough now, is he? Just a scared old man. The third member, Weasel, was huddled by the fire, his face lit by the glow of smartphone. He was small and rodent-like, his job to document their prize. "This is gonna be gold, boss. Pure gold. We'll get millions. Show everyone he's just a fake." Jason Statham remained silent, bound to the oak tree with thick, modern nylon rope. It wasn't the old-fashioned hemp stuff. This was strong, built to last, and it bit deep into his wrists. His head was bowed, not in defeat, but in focus. He wasn't meditating. He was calculating that he'd been driving his black Land Rover down a remote mountain road, heading for a secluded cabin he owned, a place to decompress. Then, a stalled cargo van blocked the narrow path. It was an old trick, but effective. He hadn't stopped to help. He'd stopped because they were in his way. As he'd stepped out, the driver, Weasel, had stumbled towards him, feigning injury. "Mister, please, my leg." Jason had seen the lie in his eyes a half-second too late. From behind the van, Spike and Razor had emerged. The crackle of a high-voltage stun gun was the last thing he heard before darkness took him. Now, he was awake, and the cold was seeping into his bones. He listened to their taunts, using their arrogance as a tool. "My old lady used to love your movies," Weasel giggled, pointing the phone at him. "Bet she won't after she sees this. Maybe you'll cry for us. Cry for the camera, movie man." Spike lumbered over, his massive frame blocking the firelight. He grabbed Jason by the hair, yanking his head back. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." He brought his face close, the stench of whiskey overwhelming. "Here's the plan, old man. You're gonna make a video. You're gonna beg. You're gonna tell all your rich Hollywood pals to pay us. And if you don't," he nodded at Razor, who stepped forward, the switchblade's point glinting. "I'm gonna start talking souvenirs. Fingers. Ears. Maybe that nose you're so famous for." Jason stared back, his eyes flat and void of fear. He wasn't thinking about their threats. He was processing data. Spike, 240 pounds, slow, favors his right side. Razor, 160 pounds, fast, but jittery and overconfident with a blade. Weasel, 130 pounds, a non-threat, glued to his phone. The rope was new, but the knot was sloppy, a standard trucker's hitch, tied by an amateur. His left wrist had a fraction of an inch of play. "What's wrong, old man?" Spike growled, unnerved by the lack of fear. "Cat got your tongue. You shouldn't have." Jason's voice was a low rasp, gravelly and cold. Spike laughed. "Shouldn't have what?" "You tied these too tight," Jason said. Before Spike could even process the words, Jason acted. He exhaled sharply, tensing every muscle in his body, then violently relaxed, creating a sudden, shocking slack. In the same instant, he rotated his left hand, forcing his thumb against his own palm with a sickening, wet pop. The pain was blinding, a white-hot scream as the joint dislocated, but his hand was suddenly smaller. He ripped his freed hand from the rope, the nylon tearing skin from his wrist. Razor, who had been leaning in with the knife, froze in disbelief. What the he never finished. Jason's freed hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a rigid five-fingered strike straight to Razor's throat. The sound of crushing cartilage was lost in Razor's gagging choke. As the lanky man crumpled, Jason grabbed the falling switchblade from his spasming hand. Spike roared in rage and lunged. He was strong, but Statham was already moving. He didn't meet the charge. He sidestepped, bringing the heel of his boot down hard on Spike's exposed knee. Bone shattered. Spike bellowed, a wounded animal sound, and fell forward. Jason didn't let him land. He drove a brutal elbow into the back of Spike's thick neck. The big man collapsed like a ton of bricks, unconscious before he hit the dirt. From across the fire, Weasel stared, his phone still recording, his mouth open in a silent scream. He fumbled, trying to run. Jason didn't chase. He scooped a handful of dirt and embers from the edge of the fire pit. With a flick of his wrist, he flung the burning hot mixture straight at Weasel's face. The man shrieked as the embers hit his eyes, dropping the phone and clawing at his face. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by Weasel's whimpering and the crackle of the fire. Jason stood, breathing heavily, the dislocated thumb on his left hand screaming in agony. He ignored it. He picked up the fallen smartphone, its screen still lit. He looked at the three broken men, then at the darkness of the woods. This was just the appetizer. Jason faded into the trees, moving with a silent, purposeful gait. The forest was dark, but his eyes were adjusting. The pain from his thumb was a sharp, steady signal, a reminder to stay focused. He found what he was looking for a quarter-mile from the camp. A small, rushing stream, its water black and icy under the moonlight. He knelt on the rocky bank, plunged his injured hand into the freezing water, and let the numbness creep in. He braced himself, then, with a sharp grunt, grabbed his thumb and jammed it back into the socket. The world went white with pain for a second, but he bit down on the agony, working the joint until it moved. It was functional. That's all that mattered. He splashed the icy water on his face, washing away the blood and dirt, the cold sharpening his senses. Back at the camp, a new sound cut through the night. The rumble of a powerful engine. A high-end pickup truck, a gleaming black monstrosity, tore up the dirt track and skidded to a halt. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a tailored suit that looked bizarrely out of place in the wilderness. This was Marcus Thorne. Thorne looked at the scene with cold, precise fury. He saw Spike groaning, holding a shattered knee, Razor unconscious, and Weasel curled up, sobbing. "You absolute idiots!" Thorne's voice was quiet, cultured, which made it all the more terrifying. He pulled out a satellite phone and dialed. "It's Thorne. The package is loose. Send Kael." "Yes, the whole team. And send Cross. I want this place sterilized." He kicked Spike in the ribs, who yelped. "You had one job. You were supposed to grab him and hold him. How did this happen?" He's not. Not what we thought." Spike stammered, blood drooling from his lip. "He's a monster." Thorne almost laughed. "You thought he was just an actor? You buffoons." He paced the campsite, his expensive shoes crushing pine needles. "Do you have any idea who you just kidnapped?" He grabbed a tablet from his truck and stabbed at the screen. "That actor has a history. A sealed history. Moscow, Chechnya, parts of Syria the maps don't even show. He wasn't in the SAS. He was the guy they called when the SAS got into trouble." He threw the tablet at Spike's chest. "You didn't kidnap a movie star. You kidnapped a ghost." A crackle came from a walkie-talkie on Thorne's belt. "Boss, we're 5 minutes out. The backup team. Spread out," Thorne commanded. "Find him. I want him alive, but I don't care how many pieces he's in." 5 men, better armed than the first crew, fanned out into the woods. These were Thorne's personal security, armed with shotguns and pistols. They were professionals, but they were still just bodyguards. They weren't soldiers, and Jason could hear them coming. From his vantage point on a small ridge, he watched their flashlights cut through the darkness. 5 beams, clustered too close together. Poor tactical awareness. They were afraid of the dark. He moved parallel to them, a shadow among shadows. The first man on the flank was walking carelessly, his light pointed at the ground. Jason dropped from a low-hanging branch, landing silently behind him. He clamped one hand over the man's mouth, his other arm looping around the neck in a perfect rear-naked choke. The man struggled for 10 seconds, his boots kicking up leaves, and then went limp. Jason laid him gently on the ground and took his pistol. The second man heard the scuffle and turned. "Marco? You there?" He advanced, his light sweeping the trees. Jason clicked the safety off the stolen pistol. He didn't fire. He waited. The man stepped closer, his light passing right over Jason, who was pressed flat against a wide tree trunk. As the beam passed, Jason lunged, grabbing the man's flashlight and smashing the heavy metal end into his temple. The man dropped without a sound. "I heard that." A voice yelled from the center. 2 beams converged on the spot. Jason was already gone. Circling back, he found the third and fourth men sticking together, back to back, moving nervously. "Where is he?" one whispered. "Right here." Jason's voice came from the darkness above them. They looked up, confused. It was all the time he needed. He dropped a heavy, dead branch he'd picked up onto the first man's head, who crumpled. The second spun around, raising his shotgun, but Jason was already on him, driving the butt of the stolen pistol into his sternum, then delivering a sharp, precise chop to the side of his neck. The last man saw his partner fall and panicked. He fired his shotgun blindly into the woods. The blast echoed like thunder. Boom! Boom! Then silence. "Come on, you bastard!" the man screamed, his voice cracking till he heard a twig snap to his left and fired again. Boom! He heard a rock fall to his right and fired again. Boom! A click. His shotgun was empty. Jason stepped out from the shadows directly in front of him, his face an impassive mask. The man fumbled to reload, his hand shaking. Jason just walked forward, took the shotgun from his trembling fingers, and hit him in the jaw. He walked back into the clearing, now littered with 9 unconscious bodies. Only Marcus Thorne remained, standing by his truck, his face pale, his satellite phone in his hand. Thorne dropped the phone and raised a small, silver pistol. "Who, what are you?" Jason stopped 10 feet away, the stolen pistol hanging loosely at his side. Thorne's hand was shaking. "You're a dead man. You have no idea who you've crossed. You're the one who crossed my path," Jason said, his voice flat. He took a step closer. Thorne fired. The shot was wild, zipping past Jason's ear. Before he could fire again, Jason closed the distance, grabbed Thorne's wrist, and twisted. The small bones snapped, and the pistol clattered to the ground. Thorne screamed, a high, thin sound. "I'm not a ghost," Jason snarled, leaning in. "I'm just the man you pissed off." He hit Thorne once, a calculated punch to the solar plexus that drove the air from his lungs and sent him to his knees, gasping. Jason picked up the satellite phone. He saw the call log. Kael and crossed. He knew this night was far from over. The first hint of a sickly gray dawn was bruising the eastern sky, but the forest remained dark. Jason checked the satellite phone. The call to Kael had been made. A cleanup crew was on its way. He looked at the wreckage of the camp. 9 bodies, 2 vehicles, and a dying fire. He couldn't stay here. He grabbed a bottle of water and a first aid kit from Thorne's truck. His knuckles were raw, and his thumb ached, but he was functioning. He needed a better location. A fortress. He remembered passing an abandoned sawmill on the drive up the mountain, about 2 miles back. It was perfect that he moved quickly, jogging through the pre-dawn chill, the satellite phone in his pocket. He reached the sawmill as the sky turned a pale, metallic blue. It was a skeleton of a building, all rust, splintered wood, and decaying machinery. The air smelled of oil, sawdust, and rot. Perfect! He climbed to the second-story catwalk, which overlooked the main floor. Below him were giant, rusted circular saws, conveyor belts, and piles of rotting logs. It was a maze of cover and shadow. He found a hiding spot and waited. An hour later, they came. Not in a noisy pickup, but in two matte black, silent SUVs. They rolled to a stop, and 4 men emerged. They moved like a single unit, clad in black tactical gear, carrying short-barreled rifles. They didn't talk. They used hand signals. These were the professionals. Their leader, a tall man with the dead eyes of a shark, scanned the area. This was Kael. He pointed 2 fingers at the sawmill, and the team split, 2 heading for the front, 2 for the rear. They were here to sterilize the site, and that included Thorne, who they probably assumed was still alive. Jason watched as 2 of them entered the main floor. Their movements were fluid, sweeping their sectors, rifles at the ready. They had thermal optics. Jason had seen them click into place, but he was prepared. He had doused his jacket and pants in the icy water from a rain barrel outside. His heat signature was a cold, blue smudge, almost invisible. The first 2 operators, Reaper and Ghost, moved past his position. "Clear," Reaper whispered, his voice a digital rasp over the radio. "This place is dead," Ghost replied. Jason dropped silently from the catwalk behind them. Before Ghost could turn, Jason drove the heel of his boot into the back of his knee, buckling it. As he fell, Jason wrapped an arm around his neck and used his own body armor as a shield, pointing the operator's rifle at Reaper. Reaper spun, but hesitated, not wanting to hit his partner. That was the only opening Jason needed. He pulled the trigger on the operator's rifle, a short, controlled burst that stitched across Reaper's chest. The man's armor caught the rounds, but the kinetic force sent him flying backward into a pile of lumber. Jason finished Ghost with a brutal neck twist, laid him down, and took his rifle, spare mags, and radio. "Reaper, Ghost, status." Kael's voice crackled on the radio. Jason didn't answer. He vanished into the machinery. "They're down. Target is hostile. Repeat, hostile and engaged." Kael yelled. He and the 4th man, Shadow, stormed in, firing probing shots into the darkness. Jason was already moving, climbing up a conveyor belt into the rafters. "He's in the walls," Shadow yelled, firing at a noise. Jason used the noise to his advantage. He found a heavy, rusted chain hook and tossed it onto the tin roof. The clang was deafening. Kael and Shadow both fired at the ceiling, the muzzle flashes illuminating their positions. Jason used that light. He fired a single, precise shot from above, hitting Shadow in the one place armor doesn't cover, the hip joint. The man screamed and went down, his leg useless. Now it was just Kael. The mercenary leader was smart. He stopped firing, plunging the sawmill back into darkness. He clicked on his thermal, scanning. "I see you, you bastard." Jason was on a move, but the wet clothes were warming up. He was visible. Kael fired, bullets sparking off the metal catwalk Jason was using for cover. Jason knew he couldn't win a gunfight. He dropped his rifle, grabbed a 2-foot steel pry bar he'd spotted, and waited. Kael advanced, his rifle up, sweeping. "Nowhere left to run, old man." He rounded the corner of a large generator. Jason wasn't there. "Behind you." Jason's voice was a whisper. Kael spun, but Jason was already inside his guard. He slammed the pry bar down on Kael's rifle, breaking his grip. The gun clattered away. Kael was fast. He drew a combat knife and slashed, cutting open Jason's forearm. Jason ignored the pain, blocked the next strike, and drove the pry bar into Kael's armored stomach. It didn't penetrate, but it cracked ribs and drove the air from his lungs. Kael staggered, gasping. Jason didn't give him time to recover. He hooked the pry bar's claw around Kael's ankle and pulled. The mercenary went down hard. Jason was on him in an instant, his knee on Kael's chest, the pry bar pressed against his throat. Kael stared up, his dead eyes wide with the first flicker of shock he'd felt in years. "Who's next?" Jason demanded. Kael just gurgled, blood on his lips. You're already dead. Cross is coming. He doesn't take prisoners." Jason pressed down just enough to cut off the air. He searched Kael's gear, finding a small, military-grade tracker and a photo. It was his own face. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was an assassination that he heard the distant thwump 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 of a helicopter. Cross wasn't just coming. He was here. The sound of the helicopter grew from a distant pulse to a deafening roar, shaking the loose, corrugated tin of the sawmill roof. This wasn't a transport chopper. It was a light attack helicopter, a small, deadly bird of prey. It circled the sawmill once, its searchlight cutting through the morning mist, then landed in the large clearing outside. Jason dragged the unconscious Kael into the deepest shadows of the sawmill's basement, a damp, earthen-floored room filled with discarded machinery. He had maybe 5 minutes. The cut on his arm was deep, and he quickly field-dressed it using Kael's medkit. The pain was focusing. 4 men disembarked from the chopper. They moved with an eerie, predatory grace that made Kael's team look like amateurs. Their leader, Cross, was a compact, coiled man with a face that looked carved from granite. He didn't wear a helmet, only a comms headset. He saw the 2 black SUVs, the bodies of Shadow and Reaper, and Kael's abandoned rifle. He knelt, touched the blood on the ground, then looked at the sawmill, his expression unreadable. He issued quiet orders. 2 men, Spectre and Wraith, peeled off, moving to flank the building with chilling precision. The third, Revenant, a massive man with a heavy machine gun, set up a firing position, covering the only exit. Cross himself walked straight toward the front entrance, his rifle held low and ready. Jason knew he couldn't fight them here. This was their kill box. He needed to change the terrain. He needed to go back to the one place he knew better than them. The forest. He found a drainage culvert in the basement. It was tight, filled with muck and rust, but it led out into a ditch 100 yards from the sawmill. He crawled, the cold mud sucking at him, the smell of decay thick in his lungs. He emerged as Cross and his team were beginning their systematic sweep of the building. He didn't run. He moved back toward the original campsite. It was a gamble, but it was the only one he had. He was on his home turf now. Cross was meticulous. His team cleared the sawmill in under 10 minutes. He's gone, Wraith reported over the comms. Headed east into the woods. He's bleeding. Cross's voice was calm, almost bored. He's not running. He's leading. Set up containment. Hunt him. The 3 operators moved into the woods, their spacing perfect, their movements a deadly, coordinated dance. They were tracking the blood trail Jason had intentionally left, but Jason wasn't running. He was waiting. He'd circled back and was now behind them. Spectre, the point man, paused. He'd seen something. A broken twig. He motioned for the team to halt. He was good, but Jason was better. He had set that trap. As Spectre crouched to examine the sign, Jason, hidden in a dense thicket of ferns, threw a rock hard against a tree 50 feet to their left. All 3 operators spun and aimed. It was a classic misdirection. In that split second, Jason burst from the ferns, targeting the rear man, Wraith. He didn't use a gun. He used the pry bar. He swung it like a baseball bat, connecting with the back of Wraith's helmet. The crack was sickening. Wraith dropped like a stone. Spectre and Revenant opened fire, tearing the ferns apart, but Jason was already diving into a shallow ravine. "Man down!" Spectre yelled. "He's in the ditch." Revenant laid down a terrifying volley of suppressive fire, his machine gun chewing up the landscape. Jason stayed low, crawling as bullets snapped inches above his head. He reached the end of the ravine and came up behind a massive boulder. He was pinned. "I've got him!" Revenant yelled, advancing. "He's trapped." Cross's voice cut through the comms. "Negative. Pull back. He wants you to advance." But Revenant was too arrogant. "I can take him." He unhooked a grenade. Jason knew he had seconds. He took the stolen rifle, stuck it on a branch, and pushed it just slightly around the rock. Revenant saw the movement and fired a long, sustained burst. While the big man was focused on the target, Jason sprinted from the other side of the rock, closing the 50-foot gap in a desperate, zigzagging run. Revenant looked up from his sights, his eyes wide with shock. He was still fumbling with the grenade as Jason tackled him. The 2 men rolled, a brutal tangle of limbs. Jason drove his elbow into the bigger man's face, once, twice. He grabbed the grenade, pulled the pin, and shoved it into the man's own ammo vest. He kicked off and rolled away. The explosion was muffled but devastating. Spectre, seeing his partner obliterated, broke. He turned and ran. He's... Jason didn't let him get far. A single, well-aimed shot from the rifle hit Spectre in the leg. He fell, screaming. Silence. Jason stood, breathing hard, his arm screaming in pain. Then applause. Cross stepped out from the trees, his rifle pointed at the ground. He was clapping, a slow, methodical sound. "Bravo," Cross said. His voice was calm. "Truly bravo. You took out Kael, and you dismantled my entire team. You're wasted in Hollywood. Who sent you?" Jason said, his own rifle aimed at Cross's chest. "Does it matter?" Cross replied, "A client who pays well and doesn't like loose ends. You were a loose end, Mr. Statham. An old file that should have stayed closed." "Game's over," Jason said. "Walk away." Cross smiled, a cold, thin smile. "You and I, we're the same. We're dinosaurs, and there's only room for one." In a blur, Cross dropped his rifle and drew a combat knife, lunging. He was impossibly fast, but Jason had been waiting for it. He dropped his own rifle and met the charge that it wasn't a fight. It was a collision. It was brutal, raw, and desperate. Cross was a master, his knife slashing, trying to find a gap. Jason was a brawler, his movements pure CQC, blocks, parries, headbutts. Cross slashed Jason across the ribs. Jason grunted, grabbed the man's wrist, and headbutted him. Cross staggered but drove his knee into Jason's gut. Jason stumbled, grabbed a handful of mud, and threw it in Cross's face. Cross recoiled, blinded for a second, and that was the opening. Jason drove his shoulder into the man's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against a tree. The knife clattered to the ground. Before Cross could recover, Jason delivered a rapid-fire series of strikes to the throat, the solar plexus, the jaw. Cross slumped to the ground, conscious but broken, his breathing a wet rattle. Jason stood over him, gasping for air, covered in blood and mud. He picked up the satellite phone. He dialed 911. "I need police and ambulance. Abandoned sawmill. Top of the mountain road. A lot of them." He looked across. "Tell your boss," he panted. "I'm not a loose end. I'm the one who cuts them." He turned and walked toward the helicopter, its rotors still. He found the keys, climbed in, and with a roar, the machine lifted into the morning sky, leaving the carnage behind. They thought he was just a screen legend, a tough guy built by stunts and editing. They were wrong. This story shows us that you never, ever judge a book by its cover, and you never, ever underestimate a man who has honed his silence. True strength isn't about the noise you make. It's about the cold, calculating calm you maintain in the eye of the storm. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their job or their appearance? When you saw Statham tied to that tree, what did you really think he would do? If you were in that situation, with those odds, would you fight or would you fold? And do you think that kind of brutal, silent professionalism is a lost art in the world today? If this story about the ultimate comeback got your heart pounding, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Share this video with that one friend who needs the reminder. We read every single comment, so let us know your thoughts. More stories about one against many are waiting on your screen right now. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with a brand new story about an impossible escape that will blow your mind.